All right, what is up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. As always, I'm your host, JK, and we are kicking off another guest episode. And I've got a returning guest, friend / all things, Joy Parrish, is back on this show. So thank you, Joy, for being here. And I'm going to keep it straight up with you guys. We're not going to get into a super long intro. I'm going to let Joy introduce herself, and we are just going to jump right into conversation because you are going to be the fly on the wall as two friends are checking in with each other to talk about who knows what. So
talk about
here we go.
Being alive. Hi, everybody. I just kicking it off right away for you. Thank you so much, JK, for having me back. Long-time listener, not a first-time caller, but really enjoy the conversations that you have and the perspectives. And I know that we've done this before, but I will always just admire how much you're willing to seek to understand different perspectives. And I'll talk about this in a little bit in a time that kind of feels a little bit harder to do that.
Yeah.
But for your audience who might not know me, my name is Joy Parrish, and I wear many hats. I have a couple podcasts. The one that I've been doing the longest is with my co-host, Claire Cook. We started as Girls Gone Wad. We morphed into This is Joy and Claire. And now we are the Older and Wilder podcast. And that focuses more on midlife. Because we've been podcasting for so long, you kind of have to evolve and morph into different things. You know, we started as a CrossFit podcast, then we morphed out of that, changed into This is Joy and Claire to kind of just broaden what we wanted to talk about for our audience. And because we're both in midlife now, we're really focusing on midlife and beyond of what that looks like for health, wellness, aging, just the stages of life that come with that. And I'm also by day a mental health therapist. So I've been practicing mental health for about over 20 years now.
Yeah.
I keep saying 20 years and then I'm like, well, I've been saying that for like 5 years. So I've been doing it for a long time. And yeah, I really enjoy connection. I think this podcast does such a good job of doing that as well, of really encouraging us to connect with people. I think podcasts do that anyway. And I think there's a huge reason of why people love podcasts is to feel connected with others. So that's, I really, really enjoy that as a passion. So thank you for having me here.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Older and Wilder. Can you also mention the other podcasts that you is it co-hosting if there's three? Tri-host?
Oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot. Co-hosting, triple co-hosting. So the other podcast I started just almost, in the summer it'll be a year. So about 6 months now, 7 months. We have been doing a podcast called The Laugh Cry Club. And that is with myself and two other hosts that are also licensed mental health professionals. So we have each of us have about 20 years plus experience of practicing mental health therapy. And we decided to do that because we didn't want to talk about mental health from a dry clinical perspective, but more from a space of people just being able to be like, feelings are hard. And we start every podcast by sharing a laugh and a cry, meaning like, what made you laugh this week and what made you cry this week? Because we always have a story for that. And then we kind of pick a topic of the week just to focus on, whether it be how to manage stress, how to manage burnout. Just this past week, we did like a New Year check-in and talked about how hard it is to kind of keep on track, quote unquote, on track with things that you sometimes set for the new year and what happens with when your plans change. So I really enjoy doing that show. Just the co-hosts are amazing, wonderful people, and I really love talking about mental health. So check out the Laugh Cry Club too if you want a dose of therapists in your pocket, in your ears.
Yeah, you're such a multifaceted podcaster.
Yeah.
Because when the baking show comes back on, then we got that too.
Yeah, then we also have the Great British Bake Off, the On Your Marks, Get Set, Bake. Every year we do the recap show of the latest season of Great British Bake Off, which is also really fun. We started that in the pandemic because we were just so like, what do we do with our lives?
Right.
And the Bake Off show was such a savior during that time in our lives because it was just like so pure. Everyone, I think, needed something wholesome, and shows really saved us during that time. I really remember
I can agree.
Putting so much stock into, like, Love is Blind came out that year, I think.
Oh,
you know, JK, aren't you a huge fan of Love is Blind?
I do. It's my favorite train wreck to watch.
Oh, it's so great.
It's my favorite train wreck. hands
Such
down.
a good train wreck. Such a good train wreck. Speaking of train wrecks, if you haven't, well, I don't know. I feel bad for like getting people into more train wreck TV shows, but just so you know where my headspace is at, and I really love train wreck shows because my husband's always like, "Why do you watch these shows?" And I'm like, because my brain. I think there's people who really want to watch shows because their brains aren't. And I'm not saying this as a dig. I'm just saying like some people have more active brains. Like I should say, thoughts that kind of run through your inner dialogue is very active.
Yes.
And people who have really active inner dialogue, I don't need a show that requires me to really put a lot of effort into it.
Emphatic cosign on this.
Because I'm like,
I don't want to interrupt your thought. Just emphatic cosign.
I saw you nodding and I was like, am I making sense? Because
100%.
There are times like, for example, I love the show Severance. My husband and I try to pick shows that we can like watch together. Severance is amazing. And that show really grabs me.
Yeah.
But there are some shows that there's too much going on. I have to pay too much attention. And I have to really think about it. And so those shows I'm watching less of. The shows that really feed my soul in a very weird way are the ones where I just don't have to pay that much attention to it. Like it's just passive watching, but you're like, oh my, it's very little brain cells because my inner dialogue is so active during the day. And so I try to explain this to my husband because he looks at it like, he's like, you're smarter than this. Like, why are you watching this trash? I'm like, because it literally feels like it's massaging your brain, if that makes sense, because you're just like,
totally.
It kind of tunes out the noise in like the perfect like proportion. So
yes,
just a little plug for that. Oh, yeah. But before I forget too, the one that really got me. So we moved a few months ago and I had a lot of unpacking to do, so much work. I was painting. And so I had a lot of time that I was like listening. What I do is I will put in my headphones and I'll listen / kind of watch it on my iPad. So I'm just like walking around with my iPad and doing chores and I'll just like kind of have it in the background. Was Love After Lockup or Life After Lockup. I think it's like I
believe I vaguely have perused one or two episodes.
Okay. I can't remember what network it was on. My friend.
It sounds like.
I think it's TLC or like one of those kind of like female focused show networks.
It could be the O network.
Can you imagine?
Let's not lie. Yeah. It could be.
It could be. But that show was so perfect. It was like.
In what way?
You just kind of like how I feel when I go to the airport, where you're like, oh, people live like this. Like, this is how people actually operate like this. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I do. Joy, there's so many entry points I now have with this conversation, like so many places I could go.
Okay, pick one. Just you pick.
Well, let me go down the list real quick. So first, totally, like I said, emphatically co-sign what you were talking about, feeling like you go through the day with a lot of internal dialogue. So there are certain forms of entertainment that are entertaining because they don't require you to do a whole lot of thought. You can jump in pretty much at any point, and within about 2 minutes, you can pick right back up on what's going on. It's not something where it's like, oh, snap, I missed this moment, so I probably need to go back to understand the backstory. It's like how I used to feel about The Young and the Restless and Bold and the Beautiful, because my step-grandfather was an airplane or a helicopter mechanic at an Army base in Alabama. And I remember whenever we would visit them for the summer, my grandmother and my step-grandfather, on his lunch break, he would come home. This is probably the antithesis of what people think that a helicopter mechanic would do on his lunch break. But on his lunch break, he would come home. My grandmother would have some lunch ready for him, and he would watch his stories, his programs. And what was on was The Bold and the Beautiful. So no matter what I was watching, for some reason, he wanted to watch The Bold and the Beautiful because it was the only one that was 30 minutes. All the other stories were an hour.
Yeah.
So I swear it was either on at noon or 12:30. So we would watch that. And I just remember sometimes I would like tap out and go do something else. But if I came back, I always knew like Ridge, Stephanie, Brooke, and Eric, something was going on and somebody was sleeping with somebody's like husband.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So yeah, My foray into reality TV came very early. But back to the internal dialogue thing, I remember it being like this big epiphany for me that not everybody has the same amount of internal dialogue. I learned this probably in the last 10 years. I didn't
Same.
realize that. I
Same.
had
Yeah.
no idea. I thought
Yeah. And I can't
everybody
remember
had a
who
running thing.
it was, like a social media post or something that I saw where
Okay.
someone, I can't remember how it came up, but that was also when I saw that, I was like, oh,
Yeah, I had no idea.
okay.
Yes, I had no idea. And then the last thing, because I think this is actually a pretty good transition here, because we're going to talk about the Super Bowl. When you were talking about like comparing Love After Lockup or whatever it's called to almost like being at the airport, one of the I'll call it weird, but things that I realized was like kind of different is when I first like really got into retail management, so the leadership space, which actually those two are not the same thing, leadership and management. We could do a whole different thing about that. When I first understood the impact of leadership and really latched onto the importance of leaders being able to de-escalate escalated customer situations. Do you remember the show on A&E called, I think it was called Airline? And it was based on Southwest Airlines. It was like a quote unquote reality show. And they basically would do like, they would show you like just the wackiest of situations. It typically was like somebody who was way too drunk to get on the airplane.
Sure.
And so they had to call the supervisor down, or it'd be somebody who's like, I need to bring, my emotional support pig on the plane, like these random situations. And then you'd have the angry person who was like, what do you mean I can't bring 15 bags? Like, that's not fair.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I literally went out and bought the DVD set. I probably still have it.
Oh, that's amazing.
So I went out and bought the DVD set because I was like trying to figure out ways to like role play beyond what my company was offering and stuff that I could read in some like Zig Ziglar book or John Maxwell book about like leadership and whatnot. And I was like, where can I find like actual tactical things to understand how to be very transparent, deal with crazy people and bring them down a level so that we can actually solve the problem that they have? Because at the time, I think I worked at the Gap. And I was like, I understand like that your bootcut jeans, like they ripped. But is that really a reason to cuss out like my 17-year-old cashier right now? It's like the airline industry. That's where I can go to learn.
Was this post Abercrombie?
This was post Abercrombie, yes. But at Abercrombie, the way you dealt with customer issues at Abercrombie was basically just like, all right, well, I mean, you can leave. That was basically how you dealt with issues there. Like if somebody complained about, my sweater shrunk or whatever, it was like, okay.
Oh, there wasn't a return policy?
I mean, there was a return policy, but you either, if you wanted to do it, cool. But if you didn't, it was just like, okay.
Oh,
like you
Abercrombie.
just,
they were so rough back then.
It was just a privilege for you to just even be in our store.
Yeah, in their store, in the presence of their store.
Or when like the parents, which now I'm in that age bracket, but when the parents would come in and be like, God, I can't breathe in here. And why is the music so loud? It was like, well, I mean, you can wait outside.
You clearly don't understand our aesthetic. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, okay. So what I was just thinking about was somewhat of a parallel with people who sometimes you just want to tap out and just not really have to do a whole lot of thinking.
Yeah.
And the level.
Wait, can I interrupt you really
go
quick?
ahead. Yes.
So you said that the airline show was like, that was kind of like your first, what did that show do for you?
It did two things. One, low key or high key, helped me develop an understanding and some different ways to like not get so personally offended when people literally went off the rails about things. And then I also, I really believe like going back on it now, and I'm trying not to do the whole like revisionist history, like, hey, I actually had a very strategic, no.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but it really truly helped me understand like how to start off with first, no matter what, try to de-escalate the situation, like bring the temperature down or like cool things off a little bit here. And then you try to work through the problem. And then the second thing was it really helped me like understand that I wasn't alone sometimes. Because some of the stuff that I would get brought into, because I got into management in my early days, and I'm dealing with people, like, one, employees who are older than me, and two, the area that's typically that I was working in, we're in like kind of like a higher tax bracket. So I'm dealing with a decent amount of people who had this sense of entitlement.
Sure.
And looked at it very much like, I pay your salary, you're lucky that I work here. And there's a lot of parallels with that and people who travel on planes and how they treat like desk agents.
Oh, yeah.
So it was, like that was,
There's
it was
so
a very
much
soothing thing for me to watch.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's really interesting. I'm going to have to check that out because I don't even remember that show. And I feel like I think I have a lot of shows.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure if you go on YouTube, you can probably find replays. I'm about positive. And it's called Airline. And I'm positive it's on there.
Okay. All right. Well, that's on my list. Okay. So you were talking about, so you were transitioning to something else too. Sorry, keep interrupting.
So sometimes, from my perspective, sometimes people just want to be entertained and they want to tap out and not really have to do a whole lot of thinking. And I have for sure observed this perspective on the halftime show at the Super Bowl, where some people have gone like many layers deep into symbolism and all sorts of different things when it came to Kendrick Lamar's performance. And then I'm not going to say that I've been hit with this particular feedback. I'm just your average person who scrolls different things on social media to just kind of see what the reactions are and things like that. And as of right now, and I hear this pretty often when it comes to not only Super Bowl halftime show, it also comes to when athletes speak out about something that doesn't have to do with bouncing a basketball or anything like that, where people are just like, I just wanted to be entertained. I didn't want to have to go through a whole dissertation on currently what's going on in our country and all that jazz. So with that, that was my smooth, soulful transition into
smooth jazz.
Let's chat. Let's chat about the Super Bowl and what were you? What'd you think? We can go wherever you want on this.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, I'm down. Whatever works.
I'm gonna like have two parts here. Number one, what I'm trying is like a personal journey that I'm on. So you'll have to kind of like keep me in check. My personal journey before I start talking about the Super Bowl.
That is dangerous. You're relying on me to keep things in line. Okay, sure.
Because I have realized that the state of the world makes me very angry and it's not sustainable. And I've been listening to a lot of Loretta Ross. If you do not know who she is an author, a TED speaker, a professor, an activist, an amazing human who talks about calling. And your podcast reminds me a lot of this, by the way, which is awesome. She talks a lot about calling in instead of calling out. And this all connects. So in case people are like, where is she going with this? So I have knee-jerk reactions to injustice and knee-jerk reactions to people not understanding the huge issues plaguing our country. And instead of being like, I get more of like this angry approach. And that's not serving anybody. It's not serving me. It makes people defensive. And so my journey has been to be like, all right, how can I learn more from Loretta Ross? If you subscribe to her newsletter, by the way, occasionally she will do live events for like $5, like donation based. You can pay more, but like it's insanely affordable, where she'll do live talks. And she recently did one talking about like, how can we call in and work through the next 4 years of this administration. And she's just so great, the way she works. And there's been a lot of white women who have kind of co-opted some of her work. So I'd be very careful. Like, I'm going to call out Mel Robbins, who is like one of the top podcasters right now, who has co-opted a lot of work done by Black women. And I heard Loretta Ross talking about something, and I was like, wait, Mel Robbins just pitched that on her podcast and didn't cite the source, which is another huge pet peeve of mine, where I was like, Mel, if you're going to say this on your podcast that's number one and probably making you millions, you better be citing your source and not act like you came up with that idea. Anyway, so rant over. Well, not over, never over, but
yeah.
Lock it up, Joy. Loretta Ross calling in culture means, instead of getting angry and calling people out. And she really is against cancel culture because she's like, that does nothing but shame people, and people don't react well to shame. And we could argue with that till the end of the day, as far as like, some people do need to be called out, or maybe some people do need to be canceled, but really, like, what does that accomplish? So I highly recommend people check out her work. So what I'm trying to do, instead of get angry, is to be curious, and that keeps my heart rate down. That keeps conversations going better, I think, which is, again, to your point of your podcast, is help me understand this. Because, we're not on the same page, or at least like help me understand where you're coming from, because we're all coming from different perspectives. And as a therapist, I understand that, but just as a human being walking around in this world, I just get so kind of fired up around the injustices. So when I watch the Super Bowl, of course, my brain goes to this place of like, oh, this was a protest. And I loved every second of it. And I felt this like gratifying feeling of like, I mean, it's probably obvious by now to your listeners, I'm not a fan of the current administration. I saw that the president was there. I felt so satisfied that he was watching this protest. He was like forced to watch it in front of him. And I thought it was beautiful, like just blew my mind.
Yeah.
Of the art was unbelievable. But I'm also a huge fan of Jay-Z's production company. And I know Jay-Z produces all the halftime shows. And so I'm like, of course, Jay-Z. So, okay. So let me back up really quick. And I talked about this on our podcast this week with Claire, where I think, and as a white woman, I'm like, I don't know this, but I would think that Jay-Z would, or at least like Black artists have to be careful, I'm saying this in quotes, of what they present at the Super Bowl. That you can't
as far as the actual show and whatnot?
Yes, you can't overtly, you can't too overtly protest, because then it'll turn into a Colin Kaepernick situation.
Is that a question or
I'm just, that was because when I'm watching the show, I'm like, oh, I see so much, like, I see it. I see. Yeah.
Well, that's because you know.
Yeah.
Like if you, it is that whole thing from start to finish was pure. If you know, you know.
Yeah.
But if you don't, you're just sitting there like, cool beat.
Beat.
Like the entertainment value.
Right.
Love the jeans, Like you may not really understand like what's actually happening.
Right.
So I think so from my perspective, based on, just kind of, oh my gosh, I was about to say piggyback, and I hate that term.
I do too. I try not to use it.
Yeah.
But it's like, we need to come up with a better word, because I don't know, there isn't a better phrase to use. Let me add on to that. It's not as satisfying.
Yeah, because I also really despise dudes who mansplain too, and very often they start off with like, so let me piggyback, or let me add on, or what she was trying to say.
Yeah.
I just had a conversation with a friend about that.
Yeah.
So what that brings to mind for me, based on what you just talked about, is my perspective is one that would tend to agree with you that that you understand as an artist, as a Black artist, and really I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who, I can't relate to a Jay-Z at all. Like from the standpoint of the level that he's operating from,
right,
a socioeconomic status, like his financial set, I can't relate to that. So and I don't try to. What I try to do, and this is really a big premise and help me understand, and just my everyday how I go about things, I try to take that scenario and then try to break it down to understand, okay, how could this be relevant and relatable to me? And then how could it be relevant and relatable to the people that I serve, being like my clients? And then how, and in no particular order, how is this relevant and or relatable to me as a parent of 2 children? So those are like the 3 areas that I primarily focus on. So when I think about just some combination of those 3 things and what you just brought up with, okay, you want to make a statement and you also understand business is business here. And basically, for me, it reminds me of being in rooms where I am the only Black person in the room, and mostly business wise, and realizing I am going to say something about something that I see that just is completely backwards here. Like, this just does not make sense. And it's clearly because you don't have an understanding of, you've not included people that will bring a different perspective to you, whether it's based on race, whether it's based on gender, whether it's based on just environment. You never grew up in an environment, whatever it may be. And I may not even be speaking for myself. I may in that time also be speaking because I maybe do, like, I've been in all male rooms before, and it's been like all white dudes and then me, and they're creating policies or whatnot for a staff that is 50-50 female and male. And I'm like, one, does anybody see an issue that we have no females in the room and we're making these particular decisions? So in a scenario like that, I think about what I'm going to try to do is we're going to try and push the envelope while understanding that if I overtly then come out and say, hey, you're the problem, that will shut that person off from listening to me. So as I'm going to bring the train back to the tracks and relate it to that Super Bowl performance, and the production and different pieces like that, I think that it was what struck me as so ridiculously high level was being able to call things out in a way that spoke directly to very specific things. Like Samuel L. Jackson as Uncle Sam is like genius. Then the whole like Squid Games thing.
Yeah.
Genius. Like there were just so many, and then the way that the flag was formed. And I was even in a group chat with some friends of mine, and they didn't get it because they were just like, they just looked at it as like, okay, you got all Black dancers, and they thought that was the symbolism. For them. That was the symbolism. Like, yeah, that was a powerful message to have all Black dancers create the image of the flag, and their perspective, because we kind of chatted about it a little bit, like their perspective, and these are white people in the chat, so they're like, our perspective is, what he did is he's taking back the power of the flag. Like that was their perspective. So it's not like, typically you got like white supremacist groups that are waving the flag and blah, blah, blah. And he's just like, no, like we can have our own perspective on this. And I'm saying this as somebody who's like literally got an American flag in my background and have for years. And so then that opened up a conversation about like the contributions of the Black person that stitched the flag and that design right in the middle, like that spot right in the middle. And they were like, snap. And I'm like, right. So there's more to this than just what you see, but it opens up those conversations. And I think that if that was part of the goal, it for sure
it
worked.
Accomplished conversation and art. That's what art does. Is art should be open to so many, I don't want to say interpretation, but I guess that's for lack of a better word, but at least conversation and acknowledgement. And I mean, that was such a powerful image. There's so much powerful imagery, but I lost my train of thought. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know that I had anything additional to add to that other than just going back to, yes, I do agree with you that there's a level of artistic genius in combination with understanding. I still want to get like the next contract, and I remember when I was in therapy, my therapist would always talk about the dance between two people, like couples, like relationship wise. It's like you do the dance, and that's kind of the way I kind of see this too. It's like the dance, like trying to figure out, okay, what can I do to get my point across, and also I want this person to stay open. And it doesn't mean necessarily open like they're going to understand it. It's just I haven't hit them at a point where they're just going to shut off and no longer listen.
Right.
So for the people who are complaining, it wasn't that entertaining or whatever it may be, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that they still probably sat through the majority of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
it's an interesting audience. I think that's what I think a lot about was He is clearly a genius. He has a Pulitzer Prize, right? Like he's
Pulitzer Prize winner.
He's a genius, and his audience is just his audience is his fan base is enormous. At the Super Bowl, you don't get to choose your fan base. Like these aren't people that are coming to see you. So I think that's where I think about is that he had this stage and people were quote unquote like forced to watch, and how powerful that is, where he's like, all eyes on me. I get a chance to make a really powerful statement and bring attention at a time when the world is objectively going bananas, and be such a platform. Well, I would imagine a lot of the Black community would be like, yes, thank you, to be a platform of acknowledgement and honor at a time when, like, as we speak, DEI is being demolished. Like the layers of that is just like, and so any of that conversation is, you're kind of like throwing it back in the face of, come at me, bro. So there was a lot of it that I just, like, my husband and I were watching it and we were just like so fired up with excitement and felt inspired. And I think that's what we need more of. And I've been listening to so many people right now around how we get through the next 4 years, and it's creating art and creating and turning pain into art and creating beautiful things. And that's historically, if you look back in history, that's where a lot of beautiful art comes from, is pain.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I thought of. But at the same time, there's all these emotions around, like, it sucks that we have to be here. It sucks that you have to, turn your performance into that. Like, we're still here.
Yeah. I really like how you verbalize that perspective. And something that comes to mind for me too is doing it on that particular stage, pardon the pun, but just doing it on that particular stage, I also bring in the perspective of having at least a cursory understanding of how much of a corporate event the Super Bowl is. So for those who may not necessarily be aware, my perspective is also formed by growing up in a household where my dad went to, I don't know, like 4 or 5 Super Bowls. In fact, I'm not going to pull it up right now, but I'm legit. I have a little cushion on my desk chair, and it's actually one of the seat cushions that he got from the Super Bowl in 1995.
No way.
Yeah. So my dad, before he retired, was I say this with an immense amount of pride. He's one of, if not the top ranking Black executive at the company that he worked at for a number of years. Like a number of years.
That's amazing.
So a big part of what he did was managing relationships with the companies that represented the top percentage of revenue for a Fortune 100 company. So that involved a whole lot of going to corporate events. In the Super Bowl, for those who are not aware, the majority of like the money that's generated at the Super Bowl is not from fans. It's corporations, companies that have invested, corporate sponsors. This is like their time to do the dog and pony show, like the NFL and all of the contracts that they have with their corporate partners. Like there's no like coincidence that for years the Budweiser commercial was like the thing, like the wada. You remember that? Like back in the day in the Clydesdales.
Oh yeah.
So when you have like that, so I have that perspective of knowing that like a few times, 3 or 4, is it 3 or 4 or 4 or 5? I can't remember how many he went to, that my dad was going to be able to go to the Super Bowl and he'd bring me back like some paraphernalia and like some different memorabilia. That's what I mean, not paraphernalia. That means something different these days. But although it's legal now, he'd bring me back, like cards and a pennant and different pins and all this other stuff. So I understand the significance of what that performance means in front of that crowd, because I think that a good number of people are looking at it like, okay, well, there were a lot of fans that were in attendance. There are a lot of people that were in attendance who likely are like when I say the decision makers for companies that shift our entire country. with their financial decisions and whether or not they are still investing and publicizing their investment in DEI based programs and things like that. So like for me, it goes like even more layers deep to pick that particular stage, because I know it's easy to kind of be like, well, yeah, it's a nationally publicized thing. I also think about who is in the building and who's in the suites at that time. And to me, that gives it so much more impact. Too.
Yeah.
Like big time.
Yeah.
So,
and also just the power that Kendrick has.
Yeah.
Crazy. He has so much power to be able to say and do things and kind of call the shots that I find a lot of satisfaction in that too. Because it's like, all right, well, you're going to have to sit and listen to this one because he's got a lot of power.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I really, 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 it's almost like, I think Scott and I watched it a few times. We had to rewind it. And we were just like, did you see that? Did you see that?
Right.
Because it was just, you're kind of left stunned. And for people who don't get it, you know, you see all the comments online that are just like, did you see Lauren Boebert's tweet, by the way?
I am thankful that my algorithm does not pick her up.
I don't know. Well, it's probably because I'm in Colorado and actually live now in her district. No, I don't live in her district. Do I live in her district? Anyway, yeah, I think I live in her, not her like county, but the district. Anyway,
we'll call her her zone.
Thank you.
We'll call it her zone.
Like she was on the ballot for when I was voting for all the officials.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. But I got to vote against her.
There we go.
Didn't work this time, but I got to vote against her.
Yeah.
But something she said on X, which is just a testament to her character, in my opinion. It's really poor character. She said something like, can we get closed captions on this? I don't understand anything he's saying. And I felt that was it's borderline racist thing to say. And then also people were calling out that DEI is going away, but yet closed captions are for people with disabilities.
Do we want to get into the?
We don't have time to unravel that. But it's just people who don't understand that or choose to kind of make fun or pick apart. It's a shame because you're missing out on such depth. You're missing out a lot of depth. And if you're just out to hate something just to hate it, I'm gonna challenge people to maybe think again, to help me understand. And I think that's just kind of the point of all of this is what I've really tried to do is, one of my rules lately is to not read the comment sections because that just makes it completely derails my journey of I'm sorry to keep saying journey. There's no other word I can think of, but
I know how you feel about that word. I'm aware. I am aware.
But I just derails me from me trying to be I just want to come from a space of, I wonder what that's about. So
yeah, more like curiosity.
Yes. Yeah. The example that Loretta uses, because Adam Grant had her on his podcast recently too. And he said he got really upset recently that someone stole some of his work or plagiarized some of it. And he wanted to come at them and be like, hey, yeah, you plagiarized my work. How does that feel? Hey, I've seen that before. It's my stuff. And she goes, well, that's calling out. You want to call people in. And he's like, how do I do that? She says, well, you would say, wow, this work looks so much like the work that I've done. I wonder how that happened. I'm like, oh, that's a much more neutral. I don't know if I can do that. Honestly, I am too much of a fiery, pissed off person.
Yeah. So here's and you'll have to give me the signal when it's the wrap it up signal, hold up a finger or something to let me know 5 minutes, that sort of a thing. Oh, is that the hand? The 5-minute hand? Okay.
No, I was checking my messages. Yeah, we'll do 5 minutes. We're good.
Okay. So I think that is actually a really good thing to chat about here real quick, because I also, and I'm specifically talking about use the example of plagiarism. However, we can use multiple different examples of you see certain things and it's okay, well, am I just going to let that slide? Or, this particular person says something about me or posts something that I find offensive or makes a comment that maybe I think is a little bit off. Am I going to call them out about it? And I bring this from the perspective of being in a space many times where, we talked about my work in leadership and retail and things like that, where I'm in a space where I am often the target of someone being upset, angry, whatever. Like I'm the face of it at that particular time, even if I did nothing to the person, like personally. So one of the things that can often happen is I'll work with somebody who's pretty angry, like pretty upset, and they'll say some certain things, and they may even try to attack me verbally and say different things. And then I'll later have a coworker who's like, I don't understand how you just let people disrespect you like that. And I talked about this on my podcast a while back. I I I'm one of those folks who I really pick and choose my moments with where I'm going to engage somebody further at the level that they are currently saying that they want to be engaged on, whatever grade level they've decided to display as far as like emotional maturity. And I think that a big part of both that and then just thinking about a situation like you're talking about where Adam Grant is talking about like being plagiarized and different things like that, I really go back to something you've heard me talk about before. Mental energy. We only have so much. And I put emotion underneath that. Like I only have so much anger to use and so much happiness to use and so much kind of, if there's a middle ground there, there's only so much. And I think that for me, like the wrong thing to do is to be like, well, I'm never going to be angry about something, because saying that I'm never going to be angry, that's not realistic for me. It's just, I kind of want to pick my moments when I'm really going to pour a lot of energy into that.
Yeah.
And
We just talked about this on the Laugh Cry Club. We talked about spoons, where you're like, how many spoons do you have left in your day? And
I think that's a great,
if you're like handing out spoons and it's like, to your point, what kind of energy do you, it's just so, for me, I'm like, oh, it's so easy to forget that piece. Like how much energy do you want to expend on this person or on this situation? But let me ask you one quick question is when those moments come up, do you feel in your body that you're fighting to not react? Or do you just have a disposition that's kind of like, do I want to?
it has evolved over time. Initially, I would use particular, even like physical cues. Like my dad actually taught me this, to push my tongue to the roof of my mouth. And I later on heard about this from somebody else, but he taught me that a long time ago, where it came from, Joy, was because he was like, your facial expressions literally are going to get you killed one day if you don't stop. Because I would get this smirk on my face and whatnot. And he was like, son, you have got to get your facial expressions under control until you can remove yourself from the situation. So he taught me this thing because I would get this sarcastic smile on my face, and he taught me to push my tongue to the roof of my mouth. And he's like, it just keeps a more stoic look. And as you're doing that, he's like, then I need you to just think like, okay, how do I want to handle this? And then thinking, okay, if what I'm about to say or do, is this based on what that person is doing or what I'm actually all about and what matters to me? Previous to this, I had no kids, so they didn't enter the conversation. So when I would deal with those situations, it was more about like me, myself, what's important to me. Now, as a parent, when I became a parent almost 19 years ago now, shout out Ava, her birthday's in 2 days. She turns 19.
Shout out Ava.
Yeah. It has become more of a natural thing. So to get to your question, like it's become more of a natural thing to, quite honestly, it's almost like I disconnect from what's happening.
Sure.
Because I can very quickly gauge, this isn't actually about like the actual issue.
Exactly.
This is like somebody. So, some people will recommend like, get curious about like, man, what happened to you?
Yes.
That got you to a point.
Right.
And so those are some different things that I now go through mentally. But first it had to start with some sort of a physical thing that I could do. For some people, I know I've got some coworkers who will like, it sounds weird, but they'll like clench their fist, but they're clenching their fist not in a way that they're going to start a fight. They'll put their hand behind their back. It's just body
awareness. It's awareness of bringing attention to something to bring yourself grounding instead of going immediately to a reaction, which is brilliant. And we would talk about that in mental health all day long. But Loretta Ross, not to quote her 50 million times, but I will,
why not?
Is she will talk about your trauma response. Like the first reaction you usually had is from like a trauma response.
Yeah.
So learning how to harness your chi, so to speak, and be like, oh, I'm not going to, and that's what I've been trying to do. Cause a lot of what I will do is like go to this place of reaction and hurt and anger and, injustice, anger. And so that's just such a good tool, I think, for anybody, is to be able to be like, all right, instead of reacting, can I just take a beat and
Yes.
then respond? And even if someone's being horrible at you, that is rarely about you and more about them.
Oh, yeah. I completely agree. And I just thought about this too, because I had a recent interaction. Another piece that I've now done is I immediately start thinking of what I can do to basically pour into myself or someone else that's the antithesis of what this person is currently trying to throw at. So, for example, I was interacting with somebody and they had their young child with them. And it was a guy who was being like verbally abusive to a coworker. So I get brought into the situation, try and de-escalate the situation. And part of me is like, I'm going to de-escalate the situation. And then also his kid is kind of acting up at the same time, like, dad, dad, dad. And he yells at the kid to shut up. And we eventually like de-escalate the whole thing, whatnot. And then after that was done, I texted a friend of mine just out of the blue, just to be like, hey, just wanted to say, like, this is going to seem really random. You just crossed my mind, and just appreciate the fact that you're always able to stay like cool, calm, and collected when you're dealing with some behavioral situations with your kids. Like, I'm just aware of a certain thing that he deals with his kids. And I just notice that he's always he's very patient with them. So what I've started doing, and this is one of the things that I'm blessed with, is just knowing a lot of different people. I have yet to run into a situation where I can't think of somebody else who's displaying the opposite behavior, and just reach out to that person and be like, hey, I know this is random. I just wanted to say thanks for that, or thanks for being that person. Or even with fitness and health, now my thing is, when I read a post that's just absolutely ridiculous and pushing somebody into potential like disordered relationship with exercise and or eating, instead of making posts about calling out another coach, I'm like, well, what would the right advice be? And sometimes that's even spurred a whole podcast episode with like, hey, let me talk to you about 2 ways to, not be so stressed about getting in protein, because everybody wants to talk about protein, like that sort of a thing.
I really, really like that. So
coming up with a different behavior that speaks more to what I value, versus putting more and more energy into that stupid comment that I read.
Right. And I see a lot of influencers out there that are like just putting a lot of energy in the things that they don't like seeing, where it's like, I think we could do better at putting energy into the things that we be the change you want to see type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a brilliant idea. I love it.
So and again, I do want to let people know that has taken time. And also, more often than not, those are the things that I'm doing. And also, I'm a human who still does stupid things every now and then, like plenty. I have a long resume there. So we're all good there too.
I think humility and trying to be humble and making fun of myself, and that's another goal of mine, is to find some humor in a lot of this, because we don't need to take it too seriously. Like, sometimes that works against us. Like, I want to improve, but I also don't want to be like super intense. I want to enjoy my life at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I know we've got to start wrapping up here. A piece that I do want to put out there, and then interested in just anything you want to piggyback off of that. Inspiration, being motivated, being fired up, I'm here for it. I'm here for all of it. In the words of the philosopher Young Jeezy, and then what? So it's the and then what? So we've, if cycles go the way that they do, about 3 weeks from now, we'll be moving on to something else. There'll be, unfortunately, another potentially like tragic event that happens. There'll be another 75 executive orders that we're going to quote unquote react to. And something that I had talked to you about, I think it was either via text or voice memo, was like, the work still stays the same. Exactly. So long before the president or whoever decided that, hey, let's chill on recognizing Black History Month. Black History Month was not created by the president of the United States. Like, P.S. It's not going anywhere, folks. It was actually FYI, created by a Black man, former member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity. Like, Black History Month was recognized by a president. I believe it might have been Jimmy Carter. Don't quote me on that. Mm-hmm. But at some point after it had been around for a while, then the president recognized it. So without going on too much of a rant here, my piece right now, what's very front of mind is one, the work doesn't change, and two, inspire to take action. Like that's really my biggest piece and my hope right now is that people will continue to take these moments of inspiration and kind of pack them in the backpack as they keep going. Like that's kind of what I'm thinking. Any thoughts that you've got kind of as we close things out here?
No, I really love that. And I love that reminder. And I talked about that on the Joy and Claire Older Wilder podcast, as far as staying focused on the work. And it's such a good reminder because we can be so distracted. And my reaction has been rage and anger and all those things, but that doesn't move the needle. So what I keep doing is, how can I continue to lift up communities that historically have not been lifted up? Or how can we talked about this on Laugh Cry Club, like I have privilege. How can I use privilege to lift up people around me that just don't have that ability, or stand up for someone? It's like they're being questioned at a grocery store, whatever it is, where you can intervene and use your privilege to help move the needle. And I think what happens is we get analysis paralysis because the problems seem very large, where if you just take every single day, every single moment of how you can just pay attention. And I think especially I'm speaking to white people, because so much of it is turning to marginalized communities where it's like, well, no, they should not be doing the work. This is something that we need to elevate and lift, take on more of those roles of at least paying attention to what you can do. And some people are like, well, what can I do? Well, pay attention, learn about the ways that you can be an ally instead of feeding into the negativity, and that's distraction, because we need more of that. We need more people to listen to Loretta Ross and do calling in culture versus calling out culture. So those are the things that have been top of mind for me, of how I can do better at that, and to continue to be a voice. I want to keep having conversations like this. I think conversations like this move the needle, which is why I'm so appreciative of your podcast, is having those conversations that bring people in. And I think so many times we're not open to those conversations, or at least people who have that defensive thinking differently, because they're afraid that you're going to try to convince them to. It's like, no, we're not. We're just, if we look at it at the end of the day, we're just trying to be more loving and kind towards one another. And Loretta will also say, like, it's just kind of the facts. It's the facts that there's nobody loses when DEI is around. No one loses when you have trans inclusion. If you have inclusion for the trans community, who loses there? Like, if we really break it down, what are we being defensive about? So myself included, for the things that I feel defensive about. So that is a very long, convoluted answer, but it's a long, convoluted state of the world.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to leave folks with this action step, my suggestion. And I've been asked the question a few times, both publicly and privately. Okay, well, if I'd like to help out, what can I do? And I've been asked this in a multitude of different scenarios. I have a lot of random conversations with people. So in a multitude of different scenarios, my answer always stays the same. If you want to help someone, you can help with either a single or combination of all three: time, energy, money. Those three things. We learn this in sales. People buy things because they either want to save their own time, they want to save their own energy, or they want to invest their money a certain way. Like their decisions are based on one and or two or all three of these things: time, energy, money. I believe that pouring into people works exactly the same way. The challenge is, it's not just about, so say if it's money, it's not just about you slap some money somewhere. It is about take some time to find people who have their hands on the shoulders of the people that currently need hope and belief that they're worth something and that they can accomplish something. So if you can donate your time, if you can spend your time helping the person or the community that you want to directly help, then spend your time. If you don't have the time, because not everybody does, we don't all have the same 24 hours. I understand that. So if you don't have the time, can you put your energy and your effort into it? So if you're somebody who has a platform, if you're somebody who volunteers at particular organizations, you're in the parent-teacher organization, whatever it may be, maybe that's where you're putting some energy into your coworker who perhaps represents that particular community, and you can put some energy into that person so that they continue to feel like someone believes in them and has hope for them. And then lastly, the money piece. If you literally have no access, like physical access to someone in a community that you want to help, like I'm not just talking about Black people here. I'm talking about like anyone, children. Like children are the main thing that comes to mind for me, because people just don't fall out the womb being 45-year-old racists.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Right.
And I'm picking
Yeah.
45 because I'm 46, so I can do that.
Yeah.
So if you're going to go the money route, then find the people who are literally boots on the ground doing things. Like we have a local like food bank that operates. You have multiple like small, I'm talking about like people who cook meals to donate to organizations. You have people who donate books to libraries. Like your library is a great resource to find community organizations. There are people who are out there doing the work. And if you can pour into the people who have hope and belief for the groups of people that you want to affect the most, that's where to put your energy. I'm going to leave it at that because I could go on a whole soapbox on that one.
Yeah.
So
this was a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate the friendship big time. We didn't really get too much into it. However, I'm a big proponent of when you want to reach out to somebody when they're actually like your friend, and I've told you this, like you just don't need a whole lot of like disclaimers or whatever.
Yeah.
You have people you can just kind of vent real quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
yeah.
it's cool. Like
It's
all good.
Yes. I very much appreciate that about you.
Yeah. So thank you again, Joy, for taking the time to come on. I will have links to the 27 podcasts that Joy is a part of. I will have links to that. And if there's anything else that you want me to include, just send it over as far as anything specific with Loretta Ross.
I think people will have had enough of me by today, but yeah.
You'd be surprised. Like I don't know, these conversations, the ones where I'm like, and really I have some relationship with literally every person that's been on my podcast.
Yeah.
And also just the conversations like this where it's just a conversation. And also I know that these are the conversations that aren't typically out there for people to really be a part of. So they think that what they see as they scroll is what represents the majority of what happens. And that represents the majority of what you see, not the majority of what actually is making the difference in somebody's everyday life. And these are the types of things that I believe make a difference in everyday life.
I agree. Well, you're definitely a proponent of that. And I'm very grateful for the work you do as well.
I appreciate that. All right. So with that, we are going to wrap up today's episode. If you've been listening this long, I sincerely appreciate it. I always like to express gratitude every episode. So I know that you've got a lot of different podcasts and all sorts of things, as we talked about, that you can consume. So I truly never take it for granted for those of you who chose to press play on the Help Me Understand podcast. I sincerely appreciate it. So thank you. Take care, and we'll talk to you next time.